You may have read books by John Grisham, Margaret Atwood, Dave Eggers, and R.L. Stine, but you can now read one book by all four of them and more than 30 other authors. It's called 14 Days, a collaborative novel, and all proceeds will go to the Authors Guild Foundation. I'm joined now by one of the authors and a member of the Guild, Cambridge's Celeste Ng, who's also written 3 New York Times bestsellers, including Little Fires Everywhere, which became a limited series with Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington. Celeste Ng, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me in.
So can you explain the conceit of this new book? What is a collaborative novel?
Well, this is a new thing that we're trying. The idea really came during the COVID pandemic. The story is about a bunch of people who are living together in an apartment building in New York when COVID hits and the lockdown begins. And to get a little space from their apartments, a little time away from their families, they go upstairs onto the roof, as people often do in the city, and they start talking and telling stories and getting to know each other. And that's the premise of the book.
And these are people who are not capable of getting out of the city, right?
Exactly.
Everyone who's been able to get out has left, and they're stuck here.
Exactly, and they're all stuck behind.
It's reminded me, when I started reading it, the first thing that it reminded me of was the Canterbury Tales, just the way you've got people in proximity going through a communal experience, but then telling stories that point up different parts of their own individual experience prior to this event. Is that a fair comparison to make?
I think it is, and that was what I thought of when they pitched the idea to me, the idea that there's a bunch of strangers who were thrown together somewhat unexpectedly and are now in the position of trying to get to know each other. And of course, the stories that they tell are always going to say something about themselves as well as the situations that they're in.
You write in this book about a character who's referred to as the therapist, and the therapist spins her story pretty early in the book. Did you create that character, or did the people who organized this effort have an array of possible characters for authors to write about, and did you pick the therapist? How did that work?
They were incredibly supportive. They said, if you want ideas, we're happy to brainstorm. But the therapist was a character that I'd had kind of knocking around in my head for a little while. She had this story and she had this voice, and in particular her grandmother, who's part of the story, has this voice. And I didn't really know what to do with them. They didn't fit into any of the projects that I was working on. And so when the opportunity came up here to give them a space, I went, oh, this might be perfect. The idea was that we were all supposed to contribute stories like we might tell at a party. You know, everybody's got sort of that story they like to tell about their uncle or the time they went to this concert or whatever happened. That was the kind of story that I had, and I'm so glad they found a way to work it in.
I don't want to give away too much here, but I'm hoping I can get you to read a little bit from the section involving the therapist. I should mention, just by way of a preface, and I don't know what page. Do you want to start cracking it open as I give people a little bit of background? The therapist describes a scheme that her grandmother has, which she picked up from a friend of hers who she plays bingo with, for placing extremely effective curses on people. Before you read the portion where the therapist puts a curse on her ex, what is the scheme that the grandmother teaches her to use?
The scheme is that you write the person's full name on a little slip of paper. You roll it up and you freeze it in an ice cube and you put it in the back of the freezer and you leave it there. I think this was an anecdote that I maybe had seen people talking about on Twitter or, something like that.
I was wondering where it came from, yeah.
I'd never heard of anything like that, but immediately my imagination got fired up and started thinking, oh, who might do this? This is something the grandmother learns from a friend of hers. So it's sort of not even a tradition, it's maybe a borrowed tradition. Mm-hmm. And the grandmother in the story uses this to help out her granddaughters in certain ways.
Could you read the couple paragraphs where the therapist says, it's really no good arguing with my grandmother, so I decided to give it a shot, and here's what happened?
Sure. I didn't feel I had anything to lose, and anyway, arguing with Appa was usually a losing battle. So I recited Alex's full name, that's her ex, first, middle, last, right down to the third. And she wrote it on a piece of paper and told me she'd pop it into the ice cube tray as soon as we hung up. And wouldn't you know it, a month later, I heard through the grapevine that my ex-friend cheated on Alex with his sister. And now they were a serious thing, and a week or so after that, I saw pictures of her 3-carat engagement ring on Facebook.
That, by the way, I should mention to anyone watching, is not the shocking.
No,
that's not the shocking.
Not the reveal.
It's not that the curse works. It's something else that you'll have to pick up the book and read it to learn more about. Were you aware of what your fellow collaborative authors were creating as you worked on your section of this?
No, and that was actually part of the fun of the project. I don't know if you've ever played that game in school or art class where somebody draws something on one piece of paper and then they fold it over and then somebody else draws another piece, and at the end you kind of unfold it. That's sort of what happened here. We each sent in our stories and we got to see how Doug Preston wove them all into sort of one narrative.
Did he have to do, the editor, did he have to do a lot of work to weave them into one narrative? Do you know how much editing effort was required?
I don't. I would guess, though, that it was a lot because I feel like he did a great job of making these characters from all these disparate pieces that many different writers put together. And at least for me as a reader, it comes out fairly seamlessly. There's one narrator who's telling the whole story, who's the super of the building, and she kind of holds it together. But since every character has their own voice, each person's story gets to shine. I'm
not done with the book. I'm still working my way through
We won't have any
book,
spoilers.
Which we should mention, it just came out today, so that's my semi-excuse, although I had an advanced copy. And it really does seem to be cohesive. It feels like, it doesn't feel like a disjointed creation. I'm wondering if you and maybe any of your fellow co-authors who you've compared notes with thought it might be a sell to get people to pick up a book which starts by bringing us back to a period which a lot of people would like to forget about.
Yeah, it's tricky. Right now, I think there are a lot of books coming out that are directly talking about COVID. Michael Cunningham, for example, has a new novel out, and it takes place during COVID. Anne Patchett, who's a really well-known, very successful writer, her most recent novel also technically takes place during COVID. Mm-hmm. And they touch on COVID somewhat lightly in some places and somewhat much more concertedly in others. But I am hoping that we're starting to be at a time where we're able to start processing what happened. I think that as a society, we really haven't dealt with what happened. We haven't sort of looked at our grief. We haven't really tried to figure out what we can make of that experience that we went through, that we're still going through. And so I'm hopeful that people are ready to pick this up. It is a book that takes place during COVID, but it's also largely, I think, about the need to find connection, even at the times where, the world, it feels like, is trying to keep you away from the people you love.
That brings us to the next question that I've got for you, which to me is a huge question. COVID obviously took a horrific human toll. But your book, this book that you've written with your co-authors, it's a reminder that that time also opened up a sense of possibilities existing that we hadn't necessarily known were there before COVID happened. I'm wondering if you personally, as someone who's engaged in this project and been thinking about COVID and what it means, do you think that we collectively as a society have retained that sense of altered possibilities as the pandemic has receded, or have we kind of forgotten?
I would like to believe that we've held on to that. I think maybe I'm an optimist at heart. I would like to believe that, the spirit in which people were trying to be kinder to each other, to give each other grace, when we were, being extra kind to delivery workers and mail carriers, when we were, recognizing the huge sacrifices that first responders make, that, teachers were making to try and teach online. I would like us to hold on to that. I don't know if we are. I think the world that we're in right now has a lot of big problems and a lot of things that pull our attention away from each other, and a lot of reasons for people to be afraid. But maybe this book and the others that are coming out can be part of reminding us that, when people are together, when there's a human connection, many more things are possible.
It's a good reminder to get, because when I think back on that time, as horrible as it was on a number of levels, what I think about primarily is how close it made my family. And I wouldn't say that my family is not close now, but there was a real intensity, a wonderful, warm intensity on that level, which I miss, and which I'd like to remember is out there as a possibility. I'm curious, was there anyone, you've obviously been writing at and being read at a very high level for a while now, was there anyone who you collaborated with on this project that you just personally got a huge kick out of being involved with?
Well, there's so many writers in here that I admire. I was reading R.L. Stein's stuff when I was a kid. I've got friends whose pieces are in here, and I love seeing everything they do. I learned so much from them. Mira Jacob, for example, Tommy Orange. But I will say that to get the initial email from Margaret Atwood to say, hey, we're thinking of putting this together. Would you like to be part of it? I was just sort of in awe. I thought, I got an email from Margaret Atwood. She is a literary hero of mine and so many others. And so it was a thrill to feel like we were working on something together.
Yeah, that's a big email to get. Just briefly, we've got about 30 seconds left, but what should people know about the Authors Guild of America and the work it does?
It's important to know that the Authors Guild is really supporting authors. They are working to fight against book bans, for example, and to support the freedom to read, which is hugely undersold. Even here in Massachusetts, there are book bans and pressures on libraries and teachers. They're also working to protect authors' rights as we start to see how AI is moving into the world of publishing, to make sure that authors' works aren't just essentially pirated and fed into AI databases and used without their consent. So they're doing a lot of work, I think, to make sure that voices get heard and that really human stories are protected.
All right, Celeste Ng, thank you for coming in and talking about this really fascinating project.
Thank you so much for having me in.
The book, again, is 14 Days, and it's available right now.